Now I'd like to introduce Professor Ken Endo, whom I've known for nearly 20 years. I have to admit. Endo Sensei is Professor of International Politics, School of Law at Hokkaido University. And until just 1 week or more so ago, he was the Dean of Hokkaido's Graduate School of Public Policy. He is also part-time professor, Global Governance Program, EU Asia Project, European University Institute known as EUI, based in Fiesole, just outside Florence, another beautiful place to visit. Professor Endo obtained MA cum laude in European Studies at KU Leuven, Belgium, and then went on to obtain a DPhil in politics at St. Anthony's College, University of Oxford in 1996. The subsequent appointments include visiting professor at University of Tokyo, visiting professor at National Chenchi University, Fernand Braudel, senior fellow EUI, visiting professor and Japan chair Sciences Po in Paris, visiting professor at University of International Business and Economics in Beijing, visiting fellow Institut Français de Relations Internationales, Paris, and Taiwan, a Ministry of Foreign Affairs fellow, MOFA fellow. He's very prolific, so I'm not going to spend time reading out all the publications to date, but his main publications are the presidency of the European Commission under Jacques Delors, the politics of shared leadership, and the end of integration, the realities and implications of the European Union, for which Endo Sensei was awarded the prestigious Yomiuri Chuo Yoshino Sakuzo Prize in 2014. His recent publication also includes The Frontiers of Global Governance and Sovereignty at the Present Times, very pertinent to today's talk. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you. Professor Endo will talk for roughly 40 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session. As announced earlier, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to submit your questions. Thank you very much, and the virtual floor is yours, Endo Sensei. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Kodate-san. It's amazing that we have known each other for more than 20 years. It's just amazing. Now, thank you very much for the generous introduction. We owe you a lot for this Shamrock program that we have at Hokkaido, as well as this Erasmus, the global version of Erasmus. Now, I also need to extend my thanks to the Hugo and your organization team, without which this event wouldn't have been possible. Now, I welcome all the participants. You're bold enough to listen to my, sort of talk on the topic that I have been thinking through these days, but it is just preliminary talk, and also in my funny English. Now, let me start with the with my small PowerPoint. Today, I intend to talk about Japan in the age of fraying international order. Now, the surrounding context might be familiar for most of you, just like, rise of not so peaceful authoritarian China, a less dependable United States, Sino-American rivalries, COVID-19 crisis. But also there are other contexts like, the still highly integrated value chain network, even after the COVID crisis, shaky socio-economic foundations of developed countries, widespread disbelief in liberal democracy and so on. Against this sort of context, I would like to speculate and then try to think through the ways ahead for Japan. Now, initially, I was thinking to have an overview on Japan's power, but I just received a list of the participants, and then many of you, and perhaps most of you, are quite familiar with these sort of things. just wanted to say that, basic indicators like population, territory, economy, military, and so on, indicate that Japan is still a formidable power, although, Japan is without the problems like aging, genders, competitiveness, and socioeconomic conditions. But I'm gonna skip this part, most of this part, except perhaps this the worrisome phenomenon on this socioeconomic gap in Japan. Now, according to the Professor Hashimoto, what was his name? Well, I forgot, but the sociologist in Japan, we have currently 9.3 million underclass people in Japan with an annual income of something like 1.86 million yen per year, right? This is equivalent to the 17,000 US dollar. And the 1 in 6 are in relative poverty, and roughly half of one-parent households in Japan are in poverty. Now, before this COVID-19 crisis erupted, we have started to embrace an increasing number of overseas workers. So, we have this, bunch of underclass people, and beside or underneath, we have this group of, overseas workers whose population exceeds the population of Yamaguchi Prefecture by now. So it's not negligible number. And the problem perhaps may arise when, this sort of group of people are not so much in a good term with the, lower middle class people, just like any other advanced democracies, economies. I just wonder that this is a sort of time bomb in Japan. We have to watch carefully how this lower middle class people in Japan would be politicized, especially vis-a-vis the underclass and the foreign workers. Now, I'm gonna skip this gender gap, which is a serious problem in Japan, but today is not the day to talk on this. What I want to do today is to analyze the basic problematic of today's world politics beyond the COVID-19 crisis. Now, I just listed 4. There are a number of many others, but for the sake of the time and focus, I just concentrate on these 4 main trends. Now, first, the geopolitical transformations centered around the US-China rivalries. I think this is the single biggest factor of today's world politics. And second, the continuity and changes of the phenomenon called globalization. This is a phenomenon which has been haunting over the past few decades. And third, the risk of developed countries. I think we are living in the age of the developed countries risk, not developing or emergent economies. And fourth, this, the problem on the part of the developed countries is paralleled by the rise of authoritarianism. So I would go one by one. Although I just found out that you have a separate seminar on the US-China rivalries. So I just tried to leave as much as possible to this separate seminar on this topic, but just try to sort of consider the character, nature of this rivalry. Now, it has the element of Cold War, although that analogy has serious defects. Now, what is the element, akin to the Cold War? Now, I think in terms of the systemic rivalries and regime differences, we are, after the end of the Cold War, we have under the illusion that, Fukushima type of illusion that we have reached the final stage of the battle of, the idea of liberal democracy and so on, but which wasn't the case, unfortunately. And after the first wave in the 1930s and the second wave of the Cold War, I think we are now having again sort of systemic rivalries element in our politics. Despite the many defects, I think Mr. Biden was right in observing the character of Mr. Xi Jinping, that he's a serious guy, but doesn't have a respect or to the democratic values, and probably think that their despotic and authoritarian regime is superior to the democratic regimes. Now, the past 4 years, especially in the United States and perhaps in the UK too, didn't have much to elevate the values of democracy. And so there are some faults on our part too. But the thing is that there are a bunch of people on the other side, who tend to think that they don't have to go into that don't need to subscribe themselves to the democratic values. So we have to take this aspect seriously because systemically our values are being challenged. Now, also like the Cold War, the competition between the United States and China, stretched into every aspect of the life. Military, economic, technology, even education these days, and cultures and so on. But the main problem of this Cold War analogy lies in the dense interdependence between the two countries and the two camps, and or perhaps more than two camps, and the sheer power of capital and production of China is so overwhelming that it just doesn't have a sense to compare it to the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was strong militarily, but didn't have this power of capital and production. And they attracted to the huge market in China. It's logical that we have much looser camps on each side, despite the rising antipathy to China in many of the countries. I just put the famous Pew Research Center's public opinion investigation. But anyway, it's not structured like East and West, and many of the countries are not happy with the hardline US line and United States. Now, but these rivalries will last for some time to come, because it is based on the quite a solid cross-party consensus in the Washington D.C. And on the other hand, the Chinese will and capacity to challenge the U.S. hegemony are quite solid too. If you look at this China production 2025 and so on, it's intended precisely to go to climb in the value chain, network. But because of this dense interdependence and because of the existence of much looser camps, as well as the widespread belief that China type of regime, is not inferior to the democratic regimes, I think it's much more difficult to manage these tensions and conflicts as compared to the Cold War. Now, may I switch to the globalization side? Now, some of the commentators like Emmanuel Todd, for instance, in France, declared, not just him, but declared that the globalization has died out with this COVID crisis. But in fact, this globalization has died so many deaths, in the aftermath of 9/11, Lehman shocks, Mr. Trump's elections, but have survived since. If you look at the G20's foreign direct investment, it has doubled since 2005, beyond the Lehman shock crisis. And the 1 in 5 jobs are now related to the global value chain. Also the share of the emergent economy in world trade has risen from 25 to 40% since 1995. Now, I wouldn't like to underestimate the impact of COVID crisis. It has inflicted something like 8.8 trillion loss in our entire economy, which is equivalent to the nearly 10% of the world GDP. And for several years from now on, I think the effects will be felt over and over again. Loss of jobs, suicide rates, perhaps again, rise of populism and so on. You never know, but the effect will last. But I wouldn't declare that again the repeated and premature death of globalization, because the core of this phenomenon has been untouched, which is the free movement of capital, which used to amount to the $5 trillion per day, and now the size has been cut down to size. But that money is somewhere there, and perhaps it's now in the bond markets and so on, but it will come back, again in some several years' time to haunt this, world economy. This amount is incredibly, it's tremendous as compared, for instance, to the, world real economy, which is valued something like $8 trillion per year. So this capital stuff is a big thing and still there. Potential is still there, and also the appetite to consume is unchanged. Perhaps the COVID crisis may have made us feel the importance of friendship and families and so on, which is a good thing. But the human nature hasn't changed all of a sudden to a radical extent. We still love to consume something cheaper, faster, better, slightly differentiated from others, and want to have it quick. Now, so I think this sort of appetite to consume is still there. Of course, it will not be the business as usual with regard to this globalization. The two factors are important. The serious, the securitization stuff will come in. the ordinary commodities look all of a sudden highly strategic, from masks to vaccines and so on, all well. I was myself appalled by the French and German determination to keep the masks at the sacrifice of Italy, in such a highly integrated Europe last year around this time. But anyway, at the time of crisis, this nation state stuff just comes into the fore. Now, the infrastructures like ports, airports, data, chips, and so on, as well as the security-related goods will be increasingly subject to the national control. But imagine, we cannot predetermine which goods and services and even knowledge will be subject to the will be securitized and security related in advance. Otherwise, if we are to control everything, we have to nationalize everything. That wouldn't happen. It would be contradictory with the nature that I have just mentioned, appetite to consume and so on. I think what would happen would be a sort of risk diversification, which is not necessarily the same as nationalization and so on. Again, this globalization in the post-COVID era, or even from the pre-COVID era, has been and will be colored by the great schisma of between the United States and China. Now, from 5G, semiconductors, to the overseas students, unfortunately, the globalization will be affected shadowed by these confrontations. But again here, I would say that the United States and China stopped well before ruining each other. If you look at the case of, for instance, international settlements, U.S. hasn't disturbed too much the Chinese the trade deals which end up in sort of settlements between the some of the New York banks. They haven't done it, and on the other hand, the China hasn't touched upon yet this national treasury bond of the United States, which could be weaponized. If you look at the U.S. sanctions as related to Hong Kong, it's almost a nuts. So I think there are some certain limitations to this confrontation too. But given this sort of schisma, another victim would be the so-called global governance. From climate change to the, climate change may have some chance, but anyway, the vaccine allocations and many others, some sort of cross-border phenomenon will continue to exist, and then hence there is a need to somehow steering this phenomenon of cross-border stuff. But over the past 2 centuries or so, United Kingdom, United States served as a sort of the hegemons to somewhat control this global phenomenon. Now, by the way, this is the thesis of Mark Mazur's eloquent book called, what was it? The Governing the World, right? So now we would lack overriding hegemon to sort of control and steer this phenomenon of globalization. Apart from this, the global confrontations and transactions and its governance, we have the serious problem inside the developed countries, and we are in the age of the risk of developed countries. And looking back, everybody knows, and most of the people were shocked by the referendum on Brexit and election of Mr. Trump back in 2016. That was perhaps the watershed year. Now, anger and angst and this globalization were the factors behind this spectacular phenomenon. Behind this, the erosion of middle class were captured by the famous Milanovich's elephant curve, where the losers and winners of globalization in its golden era, 20 years to the Lehman shock, is effectively shown in this graph. I wouldn't have probably time to touch upon this identity aspect of this crisis, but they are in a deep anxiety and globalization. Most of the people, especially the lower middle, the feeling that any individual can look all the same across the national boundaries and anywhere in the world. So that the people who may want to, anchor himself or herself into the very solid, stable identity of the nation state. Now, why this sort of crisis erupts in the advanced, developed countries? I think the Professor Roderick's trilemma of world political economy serves to explain, because he basically said that the three phenomenon cannot stand at once: hyperglobalization, sovereignty, and democracy. Now, the authoritarian regime like China, or perhaps the dubious democracies like Singapore, may go at the sovereign will for the globalization, at the sacrifice of democracy. Again, the three things cannot stand. We can perhaps imagine the situation where the global governance might be democratized through the participation of NGOs and so on. Again, at the sacrifice of national sovereignty. This is the another two stand each other. Now, what is happening now is the national people's sovereign will is up against this globalization. The losers, the middle class people as losers, and the fragmentation of the party politics is resulted because they no longer support the moderate left and right parties, and instead the extreme left, extreme right, and hence the liberal democracy is destabilized. Now, I'm gonna skip this slide. The retreat of democracy from developed countries to the developing countries, from Arab Spring to through, I don't know, the Mr. Trump to the current, Myanmar, this is accompanied by another problematic phenomenon of the rise of authoritarian regimes. Now, Russia is a problem, but I think China factor is much bigger, simply because the the size of the economy of Russia is somewhat equivalent to the Spain, right? Or slightly smaller than South Korea, perhaps. But China has grown so much, so powerfully, that it has the worldwide effect, and the I wouldn't say that the previous era was perfect, or wonderful, or simply brilliant, but there have been the accumulation of the hard-won standards in this globe, human rights, the social rights, many other types of the standards and regulations, environment, and so on. But as the China grows bigger and powerful, it has the effect to lower these hard-won global standards in political, social, ecological field. The suppressions of mainland lawyers and journalists, professors were not that noticed, about everybody have somewhat sensed, but now it's so visible, because these sort of suppressions were followed by the serious human rights violations in Uyghur, Hong Kong, and Mongolia, and so on. And and it doesn't stop at its border. The freedom of speech and expressions are under attack all over the world. The scholars from Australia to France were harassed. The museum at Nantes, historical museum at Nantes, had to cancel its display on Mongolia because the Chinese authority demanded to depict the history of Mongolia as part of the Chinese history integrally. Now, I wouldn't go further, but I just want to mention that almost 1.5 years ago, one of the colleagues at the Hokkaido was detained in Beijing. One of my closest colleagues, in fact. I had the 2.5 months sleepless nights, trying to rescue him with many others. He was invited to give a speech at the Chinese Institute of Social Sciences. Now, I think this sort of negative effects go beyond the national boundary of China as it grows, powerful. And parallel challenge have been made to the rule of law, especially in the maritime field. There are many positive sides that China has acquired over the past several decades, but we cannot disregard all of these political developments in recent times. Now, but still, we export goods to China, and we are attracted to that huge market. So in the normal times, we would try to dissociate the pursuit of economic interests from this political development and try to separate these two areas. But here is another difficulty, because China has a repeated history of weaponizing the interdependence. Back in 2010, when a drunken captain of a fishery boat of China hit the public vessels of Japan, we had to arrest him. It was near the Senkaku area. Chinese authority was angry. What happened was to detain the 4 civilians in China, as well as de facto stop of exportation of rare metals, which are obviously crucial for the advanced technologies. Now, 4 years ago, Republic Korea suffered from the de facto ban of tourism from China. Now it's Australian turn. Beef, wine, wheat. By the way, I drank Australian wine some months ago for 10 days in a row, just to show the act of solidarity. But it doesn't help. The most bulk of the Australian wine was now stopped, and then now South African one have replaced. Now you can name others: Taiwan, Norway, salmon, pineapple, whatever. I think this makes the free trade and interdependence much more difficult than the usual times. On the other hand, we still have this, feel the gravity of China's huge market. Perhaps the OECD countries may have some capacity to resist, but not all the time. And non-OECD countries have only macro concerns. So, we're somewhat subject to the arbitral treatment at some times. Now, I still have less than 10 minutes. If I may, I would like to share some of the suggestions that I have been thinking through. It may sound a bit crazy, but let me try. Now, it's quite difficult to explain just with one slide, but in terms of how to overcome the risk of developed countries, I think the hints might be found in the old classic book by J.A. Hobson's, Imperialism. I'm not going to preach on this the entire phenomenon of imperialism, but I think there are something parallel in today's world. For J.A. Hobson, imperialism was the political control of overseas countries, which is normal. But in his view, this political control is driven by the capital outflow from the metropole. So driving force was a capital. Now, he analyzed the deeper causes. That was the undervaluation of metropolitans' workers and the and resulting misery of the working class in the metropole, and somewhat the phenomenon akin to the deflation, and consumption and the spending, the depressed economies and so on. But on the other hand, the resulted surplus capital was in the hand of the capitalist, and this capital was to be projected overseas, which was followed by the political control. So that is a sort of deeper causes of imperialism in his eyes. What he proposed was the social democratic remedies at the both levels, all combined at the same time, international and domestic. So he proposed to reevaluate the metropolitans' workers so that the domestic market would be vitalized, middle class would be formed or reformed or enriched. And on the other hand, it would reduce the capital outflow. Hence, it would stop the imperial expansions. That was a sort of reforms conceived on both mm, dimensions, international and domestic, and combined. Now, we have had over the past 1 or 2 decades, in case of Japan, 2 decades or so, or perhaps more, near 3 decades, 2.5, I would say. Now, we have had this undervaluation of workers, and the capital accumulated in the corporation or capitalist hand, and the capital outflow and overflow are resulted. On the other hand, middle class is getting mager and mager, and on the other hand, there is an unmitigated flow of capital. Now, I think in Hobbesian spirits, it's a high time to reevaluate the workers, reviving middle class, and then mitigating the uncontrolled capital flow. And to enrich, to revive the middle class, every nation needs the resources. To rebuild the middle class, you need to have the international reforms, like filling the holes in tax havens. The UN has just proposed the minimum standard of corporate tax across the nations, which is, I think, the right step into the right direction, because we have had the competitive reduction of corporate tax, which is not in enlightened self-interest. Japan, France, United States all reduced the corporate tax and then reduced the resources to tackle the internal problems. Now, in that way, we can put our own house in order, because we again have to get out of this the risk of the developed countries. Otherwise, the liberal democracy and liberal democratic values may not be able to compete. Now, may I move to the international stage? I think we need to take this regime competition seriously and then compete this competition jointly and squarely, because there are a bunch of people who believe that the democratic values are not that worthwhile, and then and democratic forces are in retreat. If we let free, we may not be able to compete properly, because the Chinese achievements have been quite remarkable. From poverty to such a strong, robust economy, nurturing all sorts of a big number of people, advanced technologies in some limited sectors. But they are also combined with the surveillance technologies and military expansions and so on. I think we cannot afford to let these sort of things free. We have to compete. Now, also, we have to signal effectively that we wouldn't let it go. Through the strategic communications, from maritime security to the food safety, energy efficiency, the environmental standards, and the privacy data and so on. The complication is that in some of the sectors, China is so advanced But anyway, we have to make it sure that the Beijing listens to our determination. And also, as the socially matured democracy, we need to align ourselves around the principle to harmonize up, which is somewhat inherent in the EU's internal market. The EU has been involved in this, in this, constructing the free internal market, but at the same time was concerned not to lower the standard by this market liberalization. So they have had some sort of implicit principle to harmonize up, which is not to lower the standard, but to harmonize the standards and regulations with the higher level, if that higher level exists. In fact, it was Denmark who proposed this back in 1985 when they were negotiating the Single European Act. And the Danes were concerned that the cheaper and worse goods are coming into their place from Italy or Greece and so on. So they just inscribed this principle into this treaty, not treaty itself, in fact, not explicitly, but they aligned itself with Germany. All other member states accept this implicit principle. Now, we need to have this sort of harmonized up alliance in order not to subject ourselves to the depreciated pressures. Now, finally, here it's a bit difficult, but I think interdependence with authoritarian regime, how to manage this? This is a very difficult question. Now, I think one of the things is that we need to have the plurality of economic groupings, and through the overlapped various type of groupings, through the politics of inclusion, exclusion, and so on, we could have some sort of breathing space, not just concentrating ourselves into the one grouping fixed with the authoritarian regime. Otherwise, there will be lots of problems. Now, as regards the weaponization of interdependence, we need to have some sort of mechanism to express our solidarity to the politically targeted countries. We cannot just let the arbitrarity, rule in the world of interdependence. Now, may I conclude? I would like to just to state 4 points. Japan still is a formidable power, and though like many other nations, it has internal weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And in the face of authoritarian challenges, Japan needs to cooperate with like-minded countries and try to guard the rule of law, democracy, and social and environmental standards. Every nation has the weaknesses, and then it's and no nation is perfect, but I think we need to maintain the hard-won standards and regulations, and then develop them into the higher stage. Now, together with other like-minded nations. And in so doing, it should put its own house in order. Again, this is a task not so easy, given the internal divisions, but that is a sort of prerequisite to do anything. And here too, the international cooperation is badly needed to create the resources to tackle the internal problems. Now, I may have exceeded 5 minutes or so, but I would stop here and then look forward to exchange the views. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Endo Sensei, and fascinating talk. And I had several questions, but there are lots of questions coming in. So, and then we have only 5 minutes, but we might extend for 10, 15 minutes if you can stay with us. That'd be great. So I take probably 5 questions. And first one is actually about the famous Constitution, Article 9 issue. In light of growing international threats, what's your view on altering Article 9 of Japan's constitution in order to allow Japan to have an official self-defense force?
Am I? Yes, you listen to me now. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, right. In my view, this is not that relevant because we have the self-defense force officially, and this is international speaking regarded as an army, and respect for this self-defense forces in Japan is quite high. Mr. Abe was succeeded, in fact, Mr. Abe succeeded in putting through the collective defense regulation, the legislation through, so that the Japan's self-defense forces can fight together with the United States without much worry. Now, so some of these conservative camps question why on earth we have to change the Article 9, because in effect it can do most of the things that they want to do. Having said that, there are always the persistent aspirations to change this constitution, because it was originally written in English together with the United States and so on. But I think there aren't so much point at this stage, at least, in my view.
Thank you very much. And I noticed there are so many questions and actually people attending, taking part tonight from Europe, various parts, like one question coming from Iceland, and this one comes from probably Germany. Professor Bruce Kipler, how do you view the danger of consumption being unchanged against the background of more limited resources, as well as many resources controlled by Chinese interests and climate change? Also, the energy transformation that's currently taking place, can this consumption continue? For how long? What role will Japan play in this?
Sorry, Dr. Kudate, could you repeat, please? Is it in somewhere in questions?
Yes, Q&A. That's the second question from Bruce,
okay, sorry.
Professor Kipler. Yeah.
Is it
something to do with consumption and resources becoming limited, and environmental issue, climate change? What role will Japan play in this work?
Yes, this is Hugo's question, right?
No, it's Bruce Kipler, the second one, I think, on the top. No, I think it's moved. This is the problem. Sorry. It's KB. It says on the question and answer. How do you view the danger of consumption? I can share that with you.
Now, yes, okay, right. Well, yes, no, I understand that the level of consumption is too high for the globe to continue to exist. That is a sort of the concerns that is expressed here. If I take right, how should I put it? Probably I'm a bit pessimistic, about the capacity to alter our consumption behaviors. Yes, it has been quite serious and powerful movement. And Japan also has had the saving energy type of, changing mode of consumptions. But the, how to say, if I may repeat my own term, the appetite to consume is so powerful. I still remember that when I visited Brazil for the first time, I went to see the sort of slum, and they do everything to acquire television to watch the World Cup, even if they have a shortage of daily food. And when I visited Soviet Union back in 1987, so many people were gathering, not to me, but around my double deck cassette tape recorder or so. At that time I just realized that how powerful the appetite to consume could be. And this is this is bad, probably part of the globalization, but that sort of appetite is now widespread everywhere in the world. And then this will continue to be a serious problem, imposing a lot of burdens on our globe. Sorry for
okay, and I'm sure you'll be happy to take some questions maybe afterwards, like on the email and stuff. I think you're probably accessible. The next two questions, maybe I just combine them together. One comes from Professor Arthur Stockwin from Oxford. You probably know him very well. And another one comes from Professor Alan Riley, and something to do with Brexit and the EU. So first question is, how do you see the future of the European Union since Brexit? Will the EU survive the rivalry between China and the US? And then the second question is, will Brexit improve or increase trade cooperation between UK and Japan?
Now, the Arthur knows better probably, but I think that there's no other way for the continental European nations to survive without the framework of an integrated Europe. The divided by each nation states, they would have much less capacity to compete. The continental powers like China or United States and so on. So I think by this sheer power calculation, the European unity will survive. And then the rivalry between China and the US is intensified, and then all the more so the necessity of this framework of European unity. And that's my view. And the another is the UK Japan. Yes, we have noticed that the UK has applied for the membership of the TPP. I think we welcome this appetite to outreach the Asia Pacific. So in that sense, there is an extra incentive on the part of the United Kingdom to come closer to our region. Now, backed up by the recent surge of the antipathy to China, I think the Japan is an ideal location for allying UK itself with. But the seen from Japan, we cannot ignore the the continental European side. Because that is a big market in itself, and we have had that agreement with the European Union first. So the sort of this famous level playing field type of argument, somewhat shared on the part of Japan too. Is it all right?
Yes. Thank you. And the last question is actually from Hugo, Professor Dobson in Sheffield. And it's something to do with optimism, I think, and versus pessimism. And I think the word fraying in the title of your excellent talk, and how frayed the international order actually is the main question. And there are reasons to be positive. A more internationalist president is in the White House, and a global Britain that is hosting the G7 and COP26 this year and has applied for membership of this CPTPP, and so on and so forth. So there could be lots of reasons to be optimistic about. What's your view on this?
Oh no, I share. I mean, you could imagine if still Mr. Trump is occupant of the White House. Compared to that, hypothetical prospect, I think the current occupant is much better. I just mentioned myself the Mrs. Yellen's proposal to set the minimum standard of the corporate tax. I think it's entirely reasonable to pursue that sort of line to govern the globalization as well as to rebuild the middle class. So yes, I share. There are many other reasons too, environment, and so on, to be optimistic. But having said that, without Mr. Trump, so-called Trumpism, and the feeling on the part of those lost middle class people in the United States have been there and will be there for some time to come. So I think we are competing with time.
Thank you. Last question. Can I take one more? I think from Mr. Shin, based in I think Berlin. What do you think is the main reason that makes the European Union more reluctant to take substantial actions in Chinese issues, such as South China Sea disputes and the Huawei issue, while Japan's position regarding the issues is always more consistent and tougher? Although both Japan and the EU have strong economic interdependence with China and face potential countermeasures from Beijing.
Right. For Europe, China is not a threat. China is a distant, potential, sort of opponent in terms of imagining the different paths of the future. Now, it could, be problematic in terms of human rights and so on, but it's still distant. And the Europe has become increasingly critical, but still. The direct threat always comes from Russia more directly than China. Now, but given that situation, I think we have been quite impressed by the willing on the part of European nations to show the solidarity, in the sea lanes and Indo-Pacific areas, by putting some, frigate, submarines, and aircraft carriers and so on. This is just symbolic acts, but it again signals through the strategic communications that the rule of law, and the freedom of navigation type of things have to be preserved. It cannot be the subject to we cannot be subject to the arbitrarity. So in a sense, there are common interests between Japan and the European side. And despite distance, there are some movement in this field too. Did I answer? I'm sorry. If I maybe too loose, but
as I said, I think and thank you so much. And I'm sure, I can see lots of reunions happening after this on the emails, and also new probably sort of acquaintance. And I'm sure people will contact you if they have further questions. Unfortunately, our time is up. Thank you once again, particularly to Endo Sensei, for joining us live from Sapporo tonight. You had a long day and gave the same talk for Portland people earlier today. And so it must be quite exhausting. Thanks so much for staying longer. And I'd also like to thank all the co-organizers, Portland State University and Hokkaido University, and everyone who joined us today. So thank you once again. Stay safe and wherever you are. And どうもありがとうございました。Gormil Magav, Gore and Slangofoil.